Alright, everyone. Welcome to the Book Polls Podcast, the podcast where it's all books all the time. I'm your host, Riley Murray. As promised for this episode, we are going to be doing our first character breakdown, and for this character breakdown is going to be of a character that I have been wanting to talk about for a while, and that is Murtagh from Christopher Paolini's Eragon series. So for these character breakdowns, I like to go through each book that the character appears in, and pick out important moments, important quotes, or anything like that I feel really summarize the character's development that they're going through in that specific book. And at the very end, we'll just take a larger overview of the character's development through the entire series and just, discuss it. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the breakdown. So starting off with the first book in the Inheritance series, Eragon. Now, Murtagh shows up in chapter 36, obviously titled Murtagh, where Murtagh saves Brom and Eragon from being attacked by the Razak. And we get this really good look at him as this sort of mysterious person who knows a lot more about the riders and about magic than any real normal person should. So the big moment in the first book that makes Eragon very suspicious of Murtagh is when Eragon tries to mentally connect with Murtagh's mind to try and, figure out what his deal is, and Murtagh is actually able to block Eragon from entering his mind. Now, even at this point in the book, we've established that being able to, protect your mind and sense when people are trying to invade your mind is very rare. The normal person would not be able to do this. And it's the fact that Murtagh is able to do this against Eragon that really makes him suspicious, because even at this point, Eragon is just learning to use his mind to connect to others. Most people wouldn't be able to stop him from doing that. So the fact that Murtagh knows how to do it is very suspicious to Eragon and raises a lot of warning flags. We know absolutely nothing about his backstory or his motives or how he even knows about magic or any of that. That pretty much remains the case until chapter 50, Hunting for Answers. And we find out that he is the son of Morzan, the last of the living Forsworn, and that he is the only child of the Forsworn. And that he was basically groomed by Galbatorix to take over command and to be his new enforcer as he continued to rebuild his version of the Riders. So after this point, Murtagh is kind of sidelined for the remainder of the book. He's basically thrown in a cell because the Bardin think he's a spy because they know who his father is. And essentially he's just, again, sidelined for the entirety of the Battle of Farthendur. Unlike the movie, we don't see what he's doing during the Battle of Farthendur, which is unfortunate because, again, Murtagh is one of my favorite characters, and I would have loved to have seen more of him in this first book, but I think it is a very good introduction as we get the sense that he is this kind of tortured kid who just wants to find his own way in the world, and that he is trying to fight against the forces that constrain him and want to control his destiny. So jumping into book 2, Eldest. Unfortunately, again, this is a book where I think Murtagh got the shaft pretty badly in this book because we really only see him twice. We see him at the very beginning of the book, right before Ajihad and Murtagh get ambushed by a couple of the Urgals, and eventually Murtagh gets captured by the Urgals, and that's basically it. We don't see him for the rest of the book until the very end, where we find out that he is alive and that he is bonded with one of the remaining dragon eggs and is now bonded with a dragon named Thorn. And Murtagh only does kind of two memorable things in the Battle of the Burning Plains, and that is kill Hrothgar, the king of the dwarves, and also battles Eragon and reclaims Zarok, his father's old sword, and to tell Eragon that they are brothers, or at the very least, that he believes that they are brothers. He also defies Galbatorix's orders to bring Eragon to him. That one refusal to follow Galbatorix's orders is kind of the start of his arc moving forward, but for the most part, he is Galbatorix's puppet, and he is completely loyal to Galbatorix because he has Thorn and Murtagh in a chokehold at this point. So jumping into book 3, Brissinger, this is another book where Murtagh gets the complete shaft, and we don't even see him till the very, very last battle of the book, where he is fighting Oramus and Galbatorix takes command of him and finally finishes Oramus off once and for all. But in Brissinger, we have this one interesting moment where Murtagh is basically questioning Oramus before he kills him about why they didn't help Murtagh and Thorn while they were being trained under Galbatorix, which is, it's hinting at what we figure out in Murtagh about how brutal and destructive the training Galbatorix had Murtagh and Thorn going under. So to be completely honest, I think Murtagh gets treated worse in Brissinger than in Eldest, because at least in Eldest he pops in at the very beginning and at the very end, whereas in Brissinger, he just kind of pops in at the very end, and he's basically used as a pawn for Galbatorix to kill Oramus, and that's it. That's all he does in this book. Really disappointing that such an interesting character absolutely gets the shaft in books 2 and 3 of this series, because I really like Murtagh and I want to see more of him, and these 2 books just disappoint me so much because they don't do anything too important with his character. Okay, jumping to book number 4, Inheritance. Murtagh has slightly more to do, which I'm really happy about, and this is kind of the book where we start to see Murtagh's sort of redemption arc take place. And this really begins when Murtagh was able to convince Galbatorix that Nasawada would be a very valuable asset for them to work with to control the Empire, and Galbatorix orders Murtagh to kidnap her from the Varden and bring her back to Orobane so that the two of them can torture her in the Hall of the Soothsayer in an attempt to turn her to their side. So this entire action just shows how much Nasawada really means to Murtagh, because she was really the one person who didn't outright hate Murtagh because of who his father was and possibly thought he was a traitor. She was the one that gave him the benefit of the doubt and like saw the humanity in him and gave him a chance to try and be a better person. And it's a combination of his caring for Nasawada so much and his desire to be free of Galbatorix that he decides to turn on Galbatorix once and for all and help Eragon kill him. So Inheritance is, I think, the first book where we really start to dig deeper into Murtagh's character, because we start to really see how much he hates being under Galbatorix's control and how just unhappy he is in his situation. When Nasawada and Murtagh talk, Murtagh basically talks about how much he admires Nasawada for being able to hold out for this long under Galbatorix's torturing, because he basically broke the second he was bonded with Thorn, and he had no chance of being able to try and free himself. Whereas Nasawada is giving it her all to try and defy Galbatorix as long as she can. And this idea of Murtagh wanting to be free is very important going into Murtagh's solo book, because that entire solo book, as we'll get into later in the episode, is all about Murtagh wanting to break free of his past and decide his own future along with Thorn. So this book, again, is very good at showing who Murtagh really is as a character, and his character only gets better as we get into Murtagh, which is the next book we'll be covering. Now, this is the book that I've been waiting forever to have. This was such a treat to get, and it fills in so much of Murtagh's backstory, and it gives us a great understanding as to why he is the way he is. So let's get into Murtagh. This book starts off with Murtagh and Thorn essentially living out in the wild. It's a year or so after the fall of Galbatorix, and Nasawada has more or less established herself as the main power in the kingdom right now. So Murtagh and Thorn are just kind of doing their thing. They're trying to kind of mentally work out all of the trauma that Galbatorix put them through with their training and trying to, find their place in the world and just trying to make a life for themselves. That is until Murtagh and Thorn stumble upon a group called the Drummer and their leader Bashel, and Murtagh and Thorn decide to investigate the drama, and this does not go well, and they get into something that they never thought they would face, and they get in way over their heads with this one. So one of the interesting things that this book covers early on is how Murtagh feels about his public portrayal in the fall of Galbatorix. Murtagh's been completely forgotten in the stories about Galbatorix's fall. It's largely all about Eragon, Arya, and everyone else. And he is more or less completely forgotten in all of this. And he kind of feels almost jealous about it because he knows the truth that if Murtagh hadn't given Eragon and the others the name of the ancient language, they could not have defeated Galbatorix at all. And it is only because of him that they were able to defeat him in the first place. And again, he kind of feels jealous about it because now, instead of being praised as the hero that he really is, he's kind of pushed to the edges of society and is basically left to his own devices and is given no recognition in his part in defeating Galbatorix. So as the book goes on, we learn a lot of important things that happened between when Murtagh got captured in Eldest and when he returned for the Battle of the Burning Plains. Mainly that Thorn was caged like an animal. He would have to kill for his own food, they would torture him, they would enhance his growth so he would grow larger and he would be ready to fight earlier than he really should have been. And we learn that Thorn grew a fear of small spaces. And that comes up a lot actually in this book. And slowly, Thorn's love of Murtagh and needing to protect Murtagh, Thorn is actually able to get over this fear of claustrophobia. But it takes a while to actually break through the fear and conditioning that Galbatorix put him through. We also learn a lot about Murtagh's past. We learn that he was basically ostracized from the other noble kids at the court. They would bully him, torture him, they would just make his life as uncomfortable as possible, and he just had to take it because he really couldn't, strike back at them. The other kids' parents were like nobles and very powerful. He couldn't do a whole lot as a child. And we also see the first time that he had to kill someone in the arena. And Murtagh basically blames himself for enjoying the violence and being so good at it. He's, shaken up a lot by the fact that he has to kill someone on Galbatorix's orders for sport. Also, during these flashbacks, we get a really good understanding of Tornag and Murtagh's relationship. It was only really hinted at how important it was to Murtagh, but I think it was a really good idea to actually let us see it firsthand through these flashbacks of Murtagh when he was younger. And a lot of this comes to light after Murtagh becomes enthralled by Bishel and Aslagor and all of this stuff that happens in Now Gorgoth. Now, that entire Now Gorgoth section is essentially Murtagh back under the thrall of someone, but the entire book essentially leads up to Murtagh slowly working through his trauma from Galbatorix and from his childhood, and at the very climax of the book, he's able to rename Zarok and change the name of his sword to Ithring, which in the ancient language means freedom, which is essentially the perfect name for Murtagh's new sword, because Murtagh's entire ethos is freedom. Like I said, he's been under the command of people his entire life, and he's very, very rarely had a chance to, be his own person, and he's fought so hard to actually make that happen and to make that a permanent thing, like to permanently be his own man. So one of the more interesting things about this book that happens is the fact that the book tempts Murtagh with his greatest desire of freedom twice. Once when some of Galbatorix's loyalists find him and offer him the chance to lead a rebellion against Nasawada, and he's almost tempted by the chance to do this. But he eventually sees through the plot and realizes that if he goes with this, it would mean he would have to depose Nasawada and either exile her or execute her. And because Murtagh knows that Nasawada was the one person who didn't think of him as a monstrous traitor, he has so much loyalty for Nasawada, and that he's not going to be willing to put Nasawada's life at risk if it means that he has to, kill her or exile her. He also gets tempted by Bashel when he's in Nalgorgoth because she basically gives him visions of him being the sword of the drummer and basically being their military leader as they continue their campaign to take down Alagasia. So Murtagh's less tempted by Bishel's offer because he realizes that Bishel's offer is essentially no different than what he had under Galbatorix. That even if Bishel offered him, power, command, and freedom, he wouldn't be truly free. He would, still be under Bishel's command as her puppet, even though he was, technically ruling the country. He would not have true freedom, which is what he really seeks. Alright guys, so final character breakdown. I love Murtagh so much, and I think his character arc is so well constructed. Going from, a haunted, lonely kid who's just looking for a place to belong to a man who has finally embraced what he truly wants in life. I am so happy with how Murtagh's character arc is going, and I really hope that we get more of him going forward and that he's not completely sidelined like he was in the earlier books. And I really want to see more of his story as the series goes forward and not for him to get shoved to the side in order to focus on Eragon. I know he's the main character, but I think Murtagh along with Eragon would be a great combination that would just make the future books work so well. Alright, everyone, now it's time for a TBR update. Like I did last time, I will be updating you guys on what I've been reading recently and giving you guys mini reviews on the books I have recently finished. So I have just finally gotten to finish Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the Haymitch-centered prequel book for The Hunger Games. Now, to be completely honest, I had a lot of fun reading this book. I think the book did a great job at filling in a lot of the gaps that the main series left, because the main series really didn't go too in-depth into the history of the world itself. It just kind of left it vague. So I think it was a good chance to go back, kind of fill in a lot of those gaps, and also give us the backstory of a character that we had all really enjoyed in the main series. So that being said, I do have a couple of small things about the book that I kind of want to talk about. So a lot of this book comes down to connections to events and people that become really central in the main Hunger Games series. Now, that's not a bad thing. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes did the same thing. We got a lot of the history of the songs. We saw a lot of those written. But I think Sunrise on the Reaping doesn't do quite as well of a job of integrating those connections to the main Hunger Games as Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes did. But I don't know if that's because we know so much about Haymitch already going into all of this that it was kind of hard to make those connections feel natural. I think Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes did a better job with those connections, and they didn't seem quite as forced, and they just felt more natural than the ones in Sunrise on the Reaping. But other than that, I really did enjoy Sunrise on the Reaping. So if you want me to do a proper episode talking about Sunrise on the Reaping, let me know in the comments and I'll try and do one. So at the moment, I am currently in the middle of Upgrade by Blake Crouch. And that has been on my list for a while. I read Dark Matter and really liked it. I really like Blake Crouch as a sci-fi author, so I'm really looking forward to that, and I will give you guys an update when I finish. So, you guys have been listening to the Leftover Books podcast. I've been your host, Riley Murray. If you guys enjoyed the episode, please do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss the next one. If you guys have questions, comments, or ideas for future videos, feel free to email me at bookpolespodcast95@gmail.com. So make sure you guys stay tuned for the next episode where we will be doing a book review of Blake Crouch's Upgrade. So once again, this has been the Book Pulse Podcast, and I've been your host, Riley Murray. Thank you guys for checking in.